Free software or libre software or libreware is computer software distributed under terms that allow users to run the software for any purpose as well as to study, change, and distribute it and any adapted versions. Free software is a matter of liberty, not price. All users are legally free to do what they want with their copies of a free software, including profiting from them, regardless of how much is paid to obtain the program. Computer programs are deemed free if they give end users, not just the developer, ultimate control over the software and, subsequently, over their devices. The right to study and modify a computer program entails that the source code, the preferred format for making changes, be made available to users of that program. While this is often called access to source code or public availability, the Free Software Foundation, FSF, recommends against thinking in those terms, because it might give the impression that users have an obligation, as opposed to a right, to give non-users a copy of the program. Although the term free software had already been used loosely in the past and other permissive software like the Berkeley software distribution released in 1978 existed, Richard Stallman is credited with tying it to the sense under discussion and starting the free software movement in 1983, when he launched the GNU project, a collaborative effort to create a freedom-respecting operating system, and to revive the spirit of cooperation once prevalent among hackers during the early days of computing. Free software thus differs from proprietary software, such as Microsoft Office, Windows, Adobe Photoshop, Facebook, or Sage from Apple. Users cannot study, change, and share their source code. Freeware or gratis software, which is a category of proprietary software that does not require payment for basic use. For software under the purview of copyright to be free, it must carry a software license whereby the author grants users the aforementioned rights. Software that is not covered by copyright law, such as software in the public domain, is free as long as the source code is also in the public domain, or otherwise available without restrictions. Proprietary software uses restrictive software licenses or EULAs and usually does not provide users with the source code. Users are thus legally or technically prevented from changing the software, and this results in reliance on the publisher to provide updates, help, and support. Users often may not reverse engineer, modify, or redistribute proprietary software. Beyond copyright law, contracts, and a lack of source code, there can exist additional obstacles keeping users from exercising freedom over a piece of software, such as software patents and digital rights management, more specifically, TIVoization. Free software can be a for-profit, commercial activity or not. Some free software is developed by volunteer computer programmers while other is developed by corporations, or even by both. Although both definitions refer to almost equivalent corpora of programs, the Free Software Foundation recommends using the term free software rather than open source software, an alternative, yet similar, concept coined in 1998, because the goals and messaging are quite dissimilar. According to the Free Software Foundation, open source and its associated campaign mostly focus on the technicalities of the public development model and marketing free software to businesses, while taking the ethical issue of user rights very lightly or even antagonistically. Stallman has also stated that considering the practical advantages of free software is like considering the practical advantages of not being handcuffed, in that it is not necessary for an individual to consider practical reasons in order to realize that being handcuffed is undesirable in itself. The FSF also notes that open source has exactly one specific meaning in common English, namely that you can look at the source code. It states that while the term free software can lead to two different interpretations, at least one of them is consistent with the intended meaning, unlike the term open source. The loan adjective libre is often used to avoid the ambiguity of the word free in the English language, and the ambiguity with the older usage of free software as public domain software. The first formal definition of free software was published by FSF in February 1986. That definition, written by Richard Stallman, is still maintained today and states that software is free software if people who receive a copy of the software have the following four freedoms. The numbering begins with 0, not only as a spoof on the common usage of zero-based numbering in programming languages, but also because Freedom 0 was not initially included in the list, but later added first in the list as it was considered very important. Freedom 0, the freedom to use the program for any purpose. Freedom 1, the freedom to study how the program works, and change it to make it do what you wish. Freedom 2, the freedom to redistribute and make copies so you can help your neighbor. Freedom 3, the freedom to improve the program, and release your improvements, and modified versions in general, to the public, so that the whole community benefits. Freedoms 1 and 3 require source code to be available because studying and modifying software without its source code can range from highly impractical to nearly impossible. Thus, free software means that computer users have the freedom to cooperate with whom they choose, and to control the software they use. To summarize this into a remark distinguishing libre, freedom, software from gratis, zero price, software, the Free Software Foundation says, free software is a matter of liberty, not price. To understand the concept, you should think of free as in free speech, not as in free beer. In the late 1990s, other groups published their own definitions that describe an almost identical set of software. The most notable are Debian Free Software Guidelines published in 1997, and the Open Source Definition, published in 1998. The BSD-based operating systems, such as FreeBSD, OpenBSD, and NetBSD, do not have their own formal definitions of free software. Users of these systems generally find the same set of software to be acceptable, but sometimes see copyleft as restrictive. They generally advocate permissive free software licenses, which allow others to use the software as they wish, without being legally forced to provide the source code. Their view is that this permissive approach is more free. The Kerberos, X11, and Apache software licenses are substantially similar in intent and implementation. There are thousands of free applications and many operating systems available on the Internet. Users can easily download and install those applications via a package manager that comes included with most Linux distributions. The Free Software Directory maintains a large database of free software packages. Some of the best-known examples include the Linux kernel, the BSD and Linux operating systems, the GNU compiler collection and C library, the MySQL relational database, the Apache web server, and the SendMail mail transport agent. Other influential examples include the Emacs text editor, the GIMP raster drawing and image editor, the X Windows System graphical display system, the LibreOffice Office Suite, and the TeX and LaTeX typesetting systems. All free software licenses must grant users all the freedoms discussed above. However, unless the application's licenses are compatible, combining programs by mixing source code or directly linking binaries is problematic, because of license technicalities. Programs indirectly connected together may avoid this problem. The majority of free software falls under a small set of licenses. The most popular of these licenses are the MIT license, the GNU General Public License v2, GPL v2, the Apache license, the GNU General Public License v3, GPL v3, the BSD license, the GNU Lesser General Public License, LGPL, the Mozilla Public License, MPL, the Eclipse Public License. The Free Software Foundation and the Open Source Initiative both publish lists of licenses that they find to comply with their own definitions of free software and open source software respectively. The FSF list is not prescriptive. Free software licenses can exist that the FSF has not heard about, or considered important enough to write about. So it is possible for a license to be free and not in the FSF list. The OSI list only lists licenses that have been submitted, considered and approved. All open source licenses must meet the open source definition in order to be officially recognized as open source software. Free software, on the other hand, is a more informal classification that does not rely on official recognition. Nevertheless, Software licensed under licenses that do not meet the free software definition cannot rightly be considered free software. Apart from these two organizations, the Debian project is seen by some to provide useful advice on whether particular licenses comply with their Debian free software guidelines. Debian does not publish a list of approved licenses, so its judgments have to be tracked by checking what software they have allowed into their software archives. That is summarized at the Debian website. It is rare that a license announced as being in compliance with the FSF guidelines does not also meet the open source definition, although the reverse is not necessarily true. For example, the NASA Open Source Agreement is an OSI-approved license, but non-free according to FSF. There are different categories of free software. Public domain software: the copyright has expired, the work was not copyrighted, released without copyright notice before 1988, or the author has released the software onto the public domain with a waiver statement, in countries where this is possible. Since public domain software lacks copyright protection, it may be freely incorporated into any work, whether proprietary or free. The FSF recommends the CC0 public domain dedication for this purpose. Permissive licenses, also called BSD style because they are applied to much of the software distributed with the BSD operating systems. Many of these licenses are also known as copy-free as they have no restrictions on distribution. The author retains copyright solely to disclaim warranty and require proper attribution of modified works, and permits redistribution and any modification, even closed-source ones. In this sense, a permissive license provides an incentive to create non-free software, by reducing the cost of developing restricted software. Since this is incompatible with the spirit of software freedom, many people consider permissive licenses to be less free than copyleft licenses. Copyleft licenses, with the GNU General Public License being the most prominent, the author retains copyright and permits redistribution under the restriction that all such redistribution is licensed under the same license. Additions and modifications by others must also be licensed under the same copyleft license whenever they are distributed with part of the original licensed product. This is also known as a viral, protective, or reciprocal license. Due to the restriction on distribution, not everyone considers this type of license to be free. There is debate over the security of free software in comparison to proprietary software, with a major issue being security through obscurity. A popular quantitative test in computer security is to use relative counting of known unpatched security flaws. Generally, users of this method advise avoiding products that lack fixes for known security flaws, at least until a fix is available. Free software advocates strongly believe that this methodology is biased by counting more vulnerabilities for the free software systems, since their source code is accessible and their community is more forthcoming about what problems exist. This is called security through disclosure, and proprietary software systems can have undisclosed societal drawbacks, such as disenfranchising less fortunate would-be users of free programs. As users can analyze and trace the source code, many more people with no commercial constraints can inspect the code and find bugs and loopholes than a corporation would find practicable. According to Richard Stallman, user access to the source code makes deploying free software with undesirable hidden spyware functionality far more difficult than for proprietary software. Some quantitative studies have been done on the subject. In 2006, OpenBSD started the first campaign against the use of binary blobs in kernels. Blobs are usually freely distributable device drivers for hardware from vendors that do not reveal driver source code to users or developers. This restricts the user's freedom effectively to modify the software and distribute modified versions. Also, since the blobs are undocumented and may have bugs, they pose a security risk to any operating system whose kernel includes them. The proclaimed aim of the campaign against blobs is to collect hardware documentation that allows developers to write free software drivers for that hardware, ultimately enabling all free operating systems to become or remain blob-free. The issue of binary blobs in the Linux kernel and other device drivers motivated some developers in Ireland to launch GNU Sense, a Linux-based distribution with all the binary blobs removed. The project received support from the Free Software Foundation and stimulated the creation, headed by the Free Software Foundation Latin America, of the Linux Libre kernel. As of October 2012, Triskel is the most popular FSF-endorsed Linux distribution ranked by DistroWatch, over 12 months. While Debian is not endorsed by the FSF and does not use Linux Libre, it is also a popular distribution available without kernel blobs by default since 2011. Selling software under any free software license is permissible, as is commercial use. This is true for licenses with or without copyleft. Since free software may be freely redistributed, it is generally available at little or no fee. Free software business models are usually based on adding value such as customization, accompanying hardware, support, training, integration, or certification. Exceptions exist, however, where the user is charged to obtain a copy of the free application itself. Fees are usually charged for distribution on compact discs and bootable USB drives, or for services of installing or maintaining the operation of free software. Development of large, commercially used free software is often funded by a combination of user donations, crowdfunding, corporate contributions, and tax money. The SE Linux project at the United States National Security Agency is an example of a federally funded free software project. Proprietary software, on the other hand, tends to use a different business model, where a customer of the proprietary application pays a fee for a license to legally access and use it. This license may grant the customer the ability to configure some or no parts of the software themselves. Often some level of support is included in the purchase of proprietary software, but additional support services, especially for enterprise applications, are usually available for an additional fee. Some proprietary software vendors will also customize software for a fee. The Free Software Foundation encourages selling free software. As the foundation has written, distributing free software is an opportunity to raise funds for development. Don't waste it. For example, the FSF's own recommended license, the GNU GPL, states that you may charge any price or no price for each copy that you convey, and you may offer support or warranty protection for a fee. Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer stated in 2001 that open source is not available to commercial companies. The way the license is written, if you use any open source software, you have to make the rest of your software open source. This misunderstanding is based on a requirement of copyleft licenses, like the GPL, that if one distributes modified versions of software, they must release the source and use the same license. This requirement does not extend to other software from the same developer. The claim of incompatibility between commercial companies and free software is also a misunderstanding. There are several large companies, e.g. Red Hat and IBM. IBM acquired Red Hat in 2019, which do substantial commercial business in the development of free software. Free software played a significant part in the development of the Internet, the World Wide Web and the infrastructure of .com companies. Free software allows users to cooperate in enhancing and refining the programs they use. Free software is a pure public good rather than a private good. Companies that contribute to free software increase commercial innovation. We migrated key functions from Windows to Linux because we needed an operating system that was stable and reliable, one that would give us in-house control. So if we needed to patch, adjust, or adapt, we could. Official statement of the United Space Alliance, which manages the computer systems for the International Space Station, ISS, regarding their May 2013 decision to migrate ISS computer systems from Windows to Linux. The economic viability of free software has been recognized by large corporations such as IBM, Red Hat, and Sun Microsystems. Many companies whose core business is not in the IT sector choose free software for their internet information and sales sites, due to the lower initial capital investment and ability to freely customize the application packages. Most companies in the software business include free software in their commercial products if the licenses allow that. Free software is generally available at no cost and can result in permanently lower TCO, Total cost of ownership, compared to proprietary software. With free software, businesses can fit software to their specific needs by changing the software themselves or by hiring programmers to modify it for them. Free software often has no warranty, and more importantly, generally does not assign legal liability to anyone. However, warranties are permitted between any two parties upon the condition of the software and its usage. Such an agreement is made separately from the free software license. A report by Standish Group estimates that adoption of free software has caused a drop in revenue to the proprietary software industry by about $60 billion per year. Eric S. Raymond argued that the term free software is too ambiguous and intimidating for the business community. Raymond promoted the term open source software as a friendlier alternative for the business and corporate world. Thank you for watching till here.